Yo, what is up everybody, Jet Game. Welcome back to another Naruto reaction video here today. And today we got a brand new video with the great Swagkage, and as you can tell by the title, that is, How Strong is Sasuke Without the Rinnegan? So folks, due to the sheer amount of ambiguity ingrained within the Boruto storyline power scaling wise, the question of how strong Naruto and Sasuke are post-nerf is a highly asked one within the Naruto fandom, and rightfully so. People like to compare the two's nerfs and say that Naruto's was more dire in comparison to Sasuke's because he used Kurama more heavily than Sasuke used the Rinnegan. However, I believe that is an argument that is fallacious due to it being an appeal to ignorance, because just because Sasuke didn't use the Rinnegan tangibly on a surface level, it doesn't necessarily imply that his nerf wasn't as substantial as Naruto's. I would argue that the writers want to keep the notion that Naruto and Sasuke are within the same weight class, and I think Swag will tend to agree. And I'm very intrigued to see what Swag has to say. But before we begin, any love appreciated, hit that like button, turn on notifications, stay up with yours truly. And if you're new and you enjoy and you mess with the kid, make sure you hit that sub button, man, because once you do, become part of the family forever. Let's not waste any more time, screen. See what Swag has to say today.
Hey, how's it going everybody? Swagkage here, and today, since you guys responded so well to the video about how strong Naruto should be without Kurama, I'm going to be following it up by talking about how strong Sasuke should be without the Rinnegan. Now, unsurprisingly, just like in Naruto's case, figuring this out is pretty complicated. I don't know if I'd say that it's more complicated than it was for Naruto, but the answer in this case, at least I think is a lot less clear. There are a lot of reasons I think so, and one of them is Sasuke doesn't really have a base form like Naruto does. Naruto didn't always have Nine-Tails chakra mode active. He could enter and exit the form at will. Whereas Sasuke here, ever since he got it, hasn't shown any signs that he's able to turn his Rinnegan off.
Correct.
Now, he can deactivate his Sharingan, and I don't just mean dial it back from Mangekyo Sharingan to regular. He can turn it off completely. So, I guess if you want, you can consider that his base form. But that doesn't really matter, at least not as far as this Naruto comparison is concerned, because Sasuke still has his Sharingan. What I mean when I say we've never seen Sasuke fight in base is we've never seen him fight without the Rinnegan, which he doesn't have anymore. And that makes it a lot more difficult to say for sure how strong he is. Not just relative to Naruto, but relative to everyone else, even past versions of himself. Now, there are a couple of different ways that we can look at this, but before I get into any of the variable stuff, let me lay out what we do know for sure. First of all, and this should be obvious, Sasuke can't use any of his Rinnegan abilities anymore. He can't switch places with people and objects. He can't use that weird space-time ninjutsu that allowed him to pass through different dimensions. And all of the classic Rinnegan abilities, the sort that you'd associate with somebody like Nagato or the Six Paths of Pain, like Shinra Tensei, Chibaku Tensei, Universal Pull, the ability to absorb chakra, all that stuff is out of his arsenal now too. Something else that I'm pretty sure most of you already know is that when Sasuke acquired this Rinnegan, it replaced the Sharingan that used to be there, but he still retained all of his Sharingan based abilities. In other words, up until Boruto at least, this was the eye that Sasuke used to perform Amaterasu. And there are a lot of people who are under the impression that now that this eye is gone, Sasuke can't use Amaterasu anymore because his other eye, the one that's still just an eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, allowed him to use Kagetsuchi, or in the English dub, Inferno-style flame control. Based on what we know, this ability allowed him to manipulate the flames of Amaterasu, but only once they already existed. He couldn't create any black flames with this eye. But that seems to have changed in Boruto, because after he gets his Rinnegan stabbed out, Sasuke is shown using Amaterasu from his other eye. So even though it shouldn't work that way, and Sasuke shouldn't have access to any Mangekyo Sharingan powers anymore, he still does. He can still use both Amaterasu and Kagetsuchi, which is definitely weird, but like I said, it's just how it works now, I guess.
Alright, so I want to say this about that in particular, right? He can use Kagetsuchi and Amaterasu, right? And I think that supports the premise that the writers intend to paint this notion or this narrative that Naruto and Sasuke are still within the same weight class. Because thinking about it like this, if they took even that away, right, he would be essentially useless or even more useless post-nerf if they didn't leave that at least within his arsenal, right? Naruto lost Kurama, and they didn't want to take too much away from Sasuke, right? Because Naruto still has Sage Mode. He still has his various abilities that he's probably learned as a Hokage. But they also wanted to leave some things for Sasuke. So like, all right, I know he used his other eye for Kagetsuchi, but let's put it in this one now that he's lost his Rinnegan to give him some amount of threatening stigma, right? They want to still have him be a threat. He's still Sasuke Uchiha, and Naruto's still Naruto Uzumaki. So again, this supports the premise that they're within the same weight class, and I think that's why this inconsistent clarification by the writers was a thing. You know, they didn't explain it; they just kind of did it. But I think they did it to continue painting the narrative that Sasuke is still a threat, just like Naruto, even post nerf. But I think that's just an interesting thing. That's why I pointed out. But let's continue.
So what we know from all of this is that Sasuke's arsenal and the utility he'd provide to any team while on the battlefield has been cut down drastically. A lot of the most powerful tools in his arsenal are just straight up gone now, but he does still have Amaterasu and Enton Kagetsuchi at least, so he hasn't been totally crippled or anything.
Right.
Now I don't know whether or not he'll retain the ability to use his Susanoo, because Madara was able to use his while blind. Itachi was able to keep his active without his Mangekyo Sharingan turned on.
Right.
As a matter of fact, he had his Sharingan completely deactivated. His eyes were just straight up gray. And in one of the Storm Revolution OVAs, Shisui was able to activate his Susanoo with just one of his Sharingan intact. The other one had just been stolen by Danzo. But when Sasuke went blind during his fight against Kakashi at the 5 Kage Summit, his Susanoo just completely disappeared on the spot. So, I don't know. I don't want to make any strong statements either way, but what I will say is that even though Madara was able to use his Susanoo while blind, he never used the perfect Susanoo without his Sharingan. So even though I'm willing to admit that moving forward, Sasuke might be able to use his regular humanoid Susanoo, it'd be a lot harder to convince me that he could still use the perfect Susanoo with just one eye. And since we've never seen anyone use the perfect Susanoo without both of their Sharingan intact before, I'm gonna lean towards no, he can't. But like I've been saying, I'll grant him that maybe he still has access to the regular, weaker Susanoo. In that case, like with the Rinnegan, he'd have lost a pretty substantial part of his arsenal, and definitely something that I think we can all agree was one of his most powerful abilities. So even if we don't assume that losing the Rinnegan makes Sasuke physically weaker, he should still overall at this point be a much less capable fighter than he was in his prime. Now, granted, Sasuke didn't really use the Rinnegan for that much in Boruto other than teleportation and interdimensional travel. So he might not really care that he can't use the Pretty Path's chakra absorption or Chibaku Tensei or whatever anymore. Ever since Boruto started, it hasn't felt like Sasuke's liked all of the other Rinnegan jutsu very much.
I agree with that notion.
But I do think he's going to miss Amino Tejikara and the perfect Susanoo. He used those like all the time. Now, like I said earlier, not being able to use any of these jutsu anymore would still suck a lot for Sasuke, even if losing the Rinnegan didn't make him physically weaker. But I think that losing all this stuff and still staying at the same power level would be vastly preferable to being able to keep all of these abilities and losing the raw power boost provided by the Rinnegan. Now obviously it doesn't work that way, I'm not saying it does, but I'm just trying to make a point about how important that power boost actually is. I think it's a lot more valuable than any of the new abilities the Rinnegan gave Sasuke access to. Now real quick, I am going to throw a little asterisk at the end there. It definitely depends on how much stronger you think the Rinnegan makes Sasuke.
Right.
Because obviously if it's just a minor like 5% power boost or whatever, that's not a big deal. Being able to use Chibaku Tensei and the perfect Susanoo is probably a lot more valuable than that. But assuming the amp we're talking about here is that small or even minor by any stretch of the imagination is very optimistic for Sasuke. To be as fair as possible to anyone who might disagree with me, what I'm about to say isn't quite ironclad, but I think it comes pretty close. There are a handful of statements from near the end of Shippuden that imply, and in some cases just about flat out say, that the Rinnegan makes anyone who wields it more powerful. And not in a strength through versatility kind of way, but in the sense that they get faster, their attacks hit harder, that sort of thing. When talking about one of Madara's Rinnegan, Obito says even this one eye's chakra and ocular...
Alright, so we're about halfway through this video, and I definitely want to get my take so far. I want to start out by saying this. As far as the Susanoo, whether he has it or not, I think this can be safely said. I don't think he has a perfect Susanoo anymore, right? I believe we need both eyes to do that sort of thing. Madara needed both eyes to use it, right? We've never seen Itachi use a perfect Susanoo. We've never seen other Uchihas use a perfect Susanoo. We saw DMS Kakashi, but he had both of Obito's eyes. So that's when he was able to use perfect Susanoo. However, as far as an imperfect one, that one's a little more contentious because we see a blind Madara use a imperfect Susanoo. We see almost dead Itachi use an imperfect Susanoo, right? However, we don't see an Obito with one Sharingan use an imperfect Susanoo. I believe that one is really based on interpretation. My interpretation is this. The fact that Sasuke has an EMS, right, which is the most superior Sharingan you can acquire, probably besides the Rinnegan Sharingan, if you want to be technical. I believe the writers are going to allow him to have the imperfect Susanoo to kind of balance out the fact that Naruto has Sage Mode. Again, it goes back to the notion and the premise that the writers want to keep both characters within the same weight class. I think that's been the whole narrative they've been trying to paint since the beginning of Boruto. I believe the notion that they're at this kind of tug-of-war thing where one wants to pass the other ended after Shippuden, right? From beginning of Shippuden to the end, they were kind of one-upping each other, right? Sasuke was the man at the beginning. Naruto's learned the Rasen Shuriken, and then he got Sage Mode. And then Sasuke got MS and then EMS, right? That kind of tug-of-war sort of notion is over. The writers want to keep them in a relatively same weight class. So from that, I can imply that the writers are probably going to give him the imperfect Susanoo. I think that's fair enough to imply, granted that Naruto has Sage Mode, right? They want to keep him within the same weight class. Now, if Sasuke just didn't have even that, it would kind of be easy to say, yeah, he's quite inferior to Naruto now, which I don't think the writers are trying to paint here, in my opinion. However, if you interpret it a different way and say, well, Obito had a Sharingan, he never used an imperfect Susanoo, that's fair. I wouldn't say you're crazy. I just don't think that would kind of uphold the sort of canvas that the writers are trying to paint when it comes to Naruto and Sasuke power scaling wise. I think they want to keep them within the same ballpark as far as power. That's my opinion on that. As far as how strong Sasuke is now after losing his Rinnegan, he's definitely weaker. Now think about it like this. He was relative and pretty much equal to KCM Naruto when they were fighting Momoshiki. They were both going at the exact same speed, doing the exact same stuff. I would argue even having the same damage inflicting potential, etc. The writers made it crystal clear that they're pretty much equal. Speed, reaction time, damage inflicting potential, etc. They were pretty much equal, and they were both weakened. Keep that in mind, right? The Momoshiki was seeping the Nine-Tails chakra out of Naruto before Sasuke showed up with the Swagkage and Boruto. And Sasuke was weakened from teleporting from dimension to dimension on various occasions, which zaps his chakra pretty quickly. It's clear that happens. So it's clear that they were around the same level, and basically the same level when fighting Momoshiki. Hence, them being nerfed, you could argue they're still on the same level. He lost his Rinnegan Sharingan. Naruto lost Kurama. They were equal prior to that. The nerf was as substantial for both, right? Despite Sasuke not using the full extent of the Rinnegan abilities, right? His reaction times are going to be slower. His strength, his speed, his damage inflicted potential. Same thing with Naruto, losing Kurama. Durability, strength, damage inflicted potential, all have been decreased. Losing those tools, him losing Kurama, Sasuke using the Rinnegan. That's pretty fair, and I think that's what the writers are going for, in my opinion. I think narratively, it's implied that's what they're going for. And so far, I tend to agree with Swag's premise, but let's continue.
Your powers are so strong, I started losing myself. Yet I, who am not its original owner, was able to accomplish this much with just one. Now,
right.
The most important part of that statement, in my opinion, is the part where he mentions the chakra, as if to say the chakra volume was so great, or the chakra of the Rinnegan was so powerful, or something to that effect, right? I think we can all agree that in one way or another, Obito was saying that this didn't just give him new abilities, it also came with its own massive supply of dormant chakra that he could freely use after implanting it. Or, in other words, that having this Rinnegan made him more powerful. He also tells Sakura, again to directly quote him, if both Rinnegan are restored to their true owner, I feel no one will be able to stand against him. Keep in mind that after Madara got his second Rinnegan, the only new ability he gained access to was a better version of Limbo that allowed him to create more clones. And I guess Obito couldn't have really known that was going to be the case, but I don't think he expected it to give Madara access to new jutsu at all, really. I think that he was strictly talking about Madara's raw physical power when he said this to Sakura. The last thing of note that he says in this conversation is, with ocular powers, only with both eyes together can their full power be unleashed, which may or may not be that important, because Sasuke is a bit of a special case, where one of his eyes is an eternal Mangekyo Sharingan and the other is Rinnegan. So this might not apply, but like I mentioned earlier in the video, Sasuke did use all of his Sharingan abilities through this Rinnegan, so it's totally possible that this statement applies to him as well. So what this would mean in the case of someone like Sasuke, or even in the case of Madara when he got his other Rinnegan back, is each eye amplifies the power of its owner by an unknown but observably significant amount. But together, the eyes provide a power boost that's greater than the sum of what they provide individually. It's sort of like when Thanos put the last Infinity Stone in his gauntlet. Right? Like, it's not like the Mind Stone.
That's a perfect analogy.
Way stronger than all of the other Infinity Stones. But rather, it's that all of them had a unique trait where when they're used together, the power boost they provide to their user is much greater than when they're used individually. Now, getting back to the Rinnegan, Obito said all of this about Madara's Rinnegan, which I'd assume is weaker than Sasuke's was. Even just looking at them side by side, this seems to be the case, and it would also make sense since Sasuke got his directly from the Sage of Six Paths, while Madara acquired his through more natural means. Plus, this one Rinnegan took Sasuke from being weaker than a version of Madara with one Rinnegan and no Ten Tails to being stronger than that same Madara after he'd become the Jinchuriki of the Ten Tails. And I know saying that might be a little contentious, but I do think that Naruto and Sasuke were stronger.
Contentious but fair.
Jubi Jinchuriki Madara. Sasuke straight up blitzes him after all, and he ran away from the fight to steal Kakashi's eye so he could get his other Rinnegan back to fight them. But even if you don't agree that Sasuke was actually stronger than Madara, hopefully we can agree that the boost provided by Sasuke's Rinnegan was a lot bigger than the boost provided by Madara's Rinnegan. Now, it's also totally possible that this wasn't because of the Rinnegan, but instead because Sasuke was given Sage of Six Paths chakra from Hagoromo.
Fair.
And this is why I was saying at the beginning of the video that it's a lot less clear, even given all the information we have on the table, how strong Sasuke should be without this Rinnegan. It's impossible to say without making some assumptions how much of the heavy lifting the Rinnegan did in making him stronger, and how much of that was the power given to him by Hagoromo. It's also possible that the Rinnegan just contained all the chakra Hagoromo gave to Sasuke. There are just so many different possibilities that all lead us to wildly different conclusions about this topic that it's extremely difficult to say with any amount of certainty how strong Sasuke actually is. Like, another factor here that I haven't even talked about yet is it's unclear whether or not the chakra contained in the Rinnegan is actually gone, because it's not like the eye was just deleted, right? Like, he still has it in his eye socket. It's just
interesting
damaged.
theory.
So if, and this requires us to make a pretty big assumption to begin with, all of the chakra given to Sasuke by Hagoromo is stored in his Rinnegan, then we have to figure a couple things out. The first of which being, is the eye still functional in any capacity, and is any of that chakra still there? Then we'd have to figure out if Sasuke can actually access any of the chakra. And then if the answer is still yes, we'd have to figure out exactly how many of the cells were destroyed, and then how many of the cells were damaged to the extent that they can't provide his body any physical energy to make chakra, and then which of the cells are able to provide some physical energy but not as much as they could before. Hopefully you're starting to see why definitively answering this question is pretty much impossible. There's just too much we don't know about the way the Rinnegan works, and like I said at the beginning of the video, we've never seen Sasuke fight without it. That is, unless you count the time travel filler, which I'd prefer not to, since I'm talking about manga canon anyway.
Yeah, that one's, that event is somewhat contentious, so whether it is canon or not. I don't think it is.
There are a lot of different ways that you can interpret this, but in my opinion, just based off of what we know, and based on the way I think the Rinnegan works, I think that Sasuke is at best still relative to Naruto, maybe a little bit stronger than him, and at worst, substantially weaker than him, though I wouldn't be able to tell you precisely how much weaker. So for those of you still here, sorry for the half answer. When I started working on this video, I thought that I'd actually be able to come to a semi-definitive conclusion at least, but it's pretty much impossible to say. It really just depends on how you interpret all of the information I laid out in this video. Like I said, I personally think Naruto's stronger. At best, Sasuke is still relative to him. But based on what we've seen and based on how we know the Rinnegan functions, I don't think that's the case. That's just my opinion, though. I am not positing that as any sort of concrete fact. And you're all more than welcome to come to your own conclusions about this. Anyway, I think that's everything that I have to say about
Great
this.
video, Swag.
So as always, thanks for watching. And until next time, take care.
Guys, there you have it. And I'm going to say this, giving my 2 cents now. I actually disagree with those final statements by Swag. He said at best that Sasuke is relative, and at worst, he's vastly weaker or significantly weaker. I actually disagree with that. I believe, based off of this, I can imply that Swag is actually downplaying the nerf that Naruto received when he lost Kurama. Think about it like this. Pre-six pass amplification, KCM 2 Naruto and Sasuke were pretty much relative. That was before they got 6 pass amplification, before Sasuke even had a Rinnegan. When he had 2 EMS, he was relative to KCM 2 Naruto. He was relative to KCM 2 Sage Mode Naruto, actually. They were both fighting Jubito at a pretty equal level. You could argue, yeah, maybe Naruto's a little stronger, but not by much. They were pretty relative. All right. That was the whole kind of gist throughout the war arc, and from Boruto on, right? That was kind of the whole thing. So from that, you can imply Naruto losing Kurama is substantial. In fact, I would argue it is easier to make the case that Sasuke is now stronger. However, my conclusion is that they are relative either way. They're pretty much relative, because that's what the writers are trying to paint here. That's the canvas they're attempting to paint, that they are still relative post-nerf. I don't think one is significantly stronger or weaker than the other. I really don't. I don't think that would go against the grain of what the writers are intending to do here. So either way, they're relative. That's bottom line. That's what I think. I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think Swagkage is really taking into account the significance of Naruto's nerf. It was huge nerf. Losing Kurama is huge. You know, that's what made him relative to EMS Sasuke in the first place, was Kurama, KCM 2 Sage Mode, right? So keep that in mind when coming up with your own conclusion. Furthermore, I would like to say this. The Rinnegan, and I agree with Swag's premise on this, doesn't make you stronger because of versatility. It doesn't. He made a great point when talking about one-eyed Rinnegan Madara versus two-eyed. The only difference was a couple more Limbo clones. That's the only tangible difference. The intangible difference, which is gigantic, as pointed out by Obito when talking to Sakura, is the extreme boost in reaction time, damage inflicting potential, strength, speed, etc. That's what he was talking about. He wasn't talking about, oh, he's going to be able to use a couple more Limbo clones. Don't let him get both Rinnegan. That wouldn't make any sense. He's talking about the huge increase in raw power. That's what Obito was talking about. And clearly, the Rinnegan, well, more specifically, the Sharingan gives Sasuke a massive boost in power, right? Massive boost. And yes, I know, Swag also pointed this out. He got 6 pass powers, right? He got 6 pass powers. But it still holds. Now, the question is, does he still have 6 pass abilities, 6 pass chakra? Does Naruto have that? That's a big question that we still can't answer. You could argue there's only 2 sides of the coin here. They either both still do, or they both still don't. I don't think one of them has it, one of them doesn't. I think it would be quite disingenuous to say that one of them has 6 pass powers and one of them doesn't. I think they either both still have it, or they both lost it. Honestly, I think that's what the case is here. So the point still stands. Their nerfs were very relative in how substantial they were, power scaling wise. Hence, they are both relative in power. The Rinnegan didn't make Sasuke much more powerful because of versatility, but rather because of raw power increase. Yeah, it was cool. You had Shibaku Tensei, Shurina Tensei, Bancho Tenin. That's all cool and dandy. But it was a raw increase in power that made him much more powerful, right? And the fact that 6 plus powers were implanted in him and Naruto on top of that, right? So basically what I'm where I'm going towards is this. Whatever happens to Sasuke is going to happen to Naruto. I think that's the bottom line here that I'm trying to transmit to you guys is they are relative. They are relative, and you could argue who's stronger, who's weaker. In my opinion, there's a better case for Sasuke being stronger than Naruto, because KCM was everything to Naruto. Everything. Right? That's what made him, again, relative to EMS Sasuke in the first place, pre-6 pass amps, right? Before that, they were relative because he had KCM. If he didn't, would you say he's still relative? Would you say he's still relative to Sasuke if he didn't have KCM? No. The answer would be no. That wouldn't make sense power scaling progression-wise. It wouldn't make sense. So, even with Sage Mode, would you still think he's on the same level as EMS Sasuke? Right? Ask yourself that question. And yes, I know Sasuke only has one EMS, which again proves my premise that they are relative now. It's easier to assume they are relative now that Sasuke only has one EMS and Naruto has Sage Mode now, right? And it's probably improved from the past. He probably has a longer time limit. It's probably more efficient. He's probably even more of a perfect sage than he was as a teenager. That just further proves my premise that they are relative, right? Now, let's get into some more theoretical talk here. Could they get their powers back? I just want to talk about that real quickly now that we've reacted to both Sasuke and Naruto nerf videos by Swag. All right. It's actually more reasonable to think that Sasuke could get a Rinnegan back. It's more reasonable because all he needs are Hashirama cells. If he gets a new arm with Hashirama cells, his Rinnegan could awaken, right? Now, I know some of you are going to say, well, when Madara did it, it didn't awaken until he almost was dead already. Well, as an Edo, he awakened it right away. Right away. It's a contentious thing. It really is. Or, if you want to take another approach, it could be artificially made, I'm sure, by Amato. Or maybe one of the scientists could regenerate his eye, the dead, any cells left in his eye. That's also very probable. As far as Naruto, it's tough. It's tough because Kurama's gone. He's been extracted from Naruto's soul, essentially. He's gone. His spirit, everything. There's no essence of him left. The writers will have to come in and say, okay, maybe he's resurrected somehow. Or there'll have to be some crazy plot device ingrained within the storyline. You know, it'd be much easier for Sasuke, essentially, is what I'm saying, to get his powers back, quote unquote, or to get stronger. So that's something else to think about. It's very theoretical, but this is my take on how probable that is. It is virtually 0%, and here's why. Because the writers want to pass it on to the next generation. That's the main thing here. That's the main gist of it. That's why it's called Boruto and not Naruto anymore. It's about the next generation. It's literally called Boruto Next Generations, right? That's literally the title of the anime/manga itself. So the intention of the writers, which is pretty crystal clear, is to pass it on to the next generation. So giving Sasuke and Naruto powers again would kind of go against their own intended goals, right? So unfortunately, as much as we romanticize these characters, as much as we love and just admire these characters, it's over. Their era is done. It's done. It's no longer about Naruto and Sasuke. It's now about Boruto and Kawaki. That's what it's about. This is the next step in the Naruto verse history books. This is the next step in evolution, so to speak. The next big thing is Boruto. It's the passing of the torch, essentially. Their nerfs were essentially, narratively speaking, the passing of the torch. The writers are basically telling us Naruto and Sasuke's time is done. It's over. No more Naruto and Sasuke being the big dogs. It's done. It's time for Boruto and Kawaki to take over. And that's a very hard pill for many of us to swallow, including myself. Right? We're so used to Naruto and Sasuke saving the day. We admire him so highly. That time has come to pass. That's the past now. That's a big thing. Moving on from the past. And it's your choice whether to continue watching or not. Because the reality of the situation is their time has passed. And I hate to say that. I wish it didn't. I wish we can go on forever with Naruto and Sasuke, honestly. Forever. Like some Dragon Ball Z shit. Where Goku and Vegeta are still the top dogs in Dragon Ball Super 20 years later. Since the beginning of Dragon Ball. Right? They're still the top dogs. Their sons are fodder. Gohan's fodder. You know, compared to Goku, to be honest with you. And Trunks. So, I kind of wish we'd have that approach. But part of me wishes that. I'm sure many of you wish that as well. Where they're the top dogs for decades in real time. Like Vegeta and Goku. But I don't think the writers have that intention in mind here. Or they wouldn't have nerfed the two. You know. It's very, very improbable that they get their powers back. Maybe I'm wrong. Again, this is my opinion, but this is my take on this narratively speaking. Power scaling speaking. So, then to answer the question to the title of the very video we just reacted to, how strong is Sasuke without the Rinnegan? The answer to that question is about as strong as Naruto. That's the bottom line. My opinion, that's the bottom line. That's how strong he is. About as strong as Naruto. We can argue he's a little weaker. You can argue he's a little stronger. The notion that he's way stronger or way weaker just doesn't hold with me. I think the writers have made their intentions crystal clear, indirectly. They don't have to go out and say it by quoting it and saying it. I think they made it crystal clear, in my opinion. That's my opinion. And if I'm wrong, please let me know. I will admit I'm wrong. Maybe the writers said, oh yeah, Sasuke's way stronger or way weaker or whatever. If that's the case, please let me know. But to my understanding and to my knowledge, they haven't, and that's my opinion. So yeah, guys, that's the video. This was very intriguing. It's just a whole shabaco. It's a very interesting thing to think about. Both Naruto and Sasuke, how strong are they? Right? It's a very intriguing question, and very interesting to try and answer. I think Swag did a great job. I agree with basically everything besides the end where he said at best Sasuke is relative and at worst he's way weaker. I disagree with that. But besides that, I agree with everything he had to say. Very fair takes. Again, these questions are really based on your interpretation. Because again, in next-gen animes, there is a high amount of ambiguity ingrained within the storylines. And that's the intention of the writers. They want to keep you on your toes. It's a great marketing strategy, honestly. They want to keep you on your toes. They don't want you to know everything. They want you to keep talking about the anime. Because that sells books. That keeps people's eyes on the screen. That's a good marketing strategy. So shout out to the writers of next-gen animes. Shout out to the writers of Boruto because they keep us talking. They don't make things crystal clear. They just give you a little taste, a little event, and they let you interpret what happened, what's next, how strong are these people, etc. Great marketing strategy. It really is. I ranted a little too long. I could talk about this forever. But yeah, guys, I might talk about this further in my own video. This is very intriguing. If you guys would want something like that, let me know. Maybe we can talk about, the power scaling progression of these two and Boruto or whatever. That's just another video idea. If you guys would want that, let me know. But yeah, guys, great video. If you guys have any recommendations, please let me know in the comments. And of course, let me know your thoughts on this. Maybe you have a completely different perspective that I haven't even took into account. But yeah, that's going to wrap it up, and I'll catch you in the next video. This is Jay signing out. Peace.